closing of the Strait of Hormuz, what happens in one part of the world affects everyone, everywhere. Therefore, complying with international law and the delivery on the Sustainable Development Goals is not optional, but in the interest of all of us. The Charter of the United Nations is our common life insurance. As President of the General Assembly for this 80th session, therefore, my key priority is to defend the Charter and the international rule of law. In this regard, I also called for a cross-regional alliance to support multilateralism and the United Nations. This is why I have traveled to India, one of the world's biggest democracies, and its continued leadership and partnership for multilateralism is central in these times. Its steadfast commitment to the Charter and the rule of law is a guarantee for peace for all of us. As one of the founding members of the United Nations, India has played a critical role throughout the organization's 80-year history and across all three pillars of the UN Charter. Since 1948 on peace and security, India has contributed more than 300,000 troops to more than 53 missions. More than 184 Indian peacekeepers have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of global peace. As a champion for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals implementation, India leads in South-South cooperation, for example, by the Indian UN Development Partnership Fund to specifically support least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states in their pursuits to the SDGs. And at a time where there's a backlash against human rights and women's rights, it is important to remind people that both human rights and women's rights have been embedded in the UN since the beginning as a foundation of peace and development. As a great female Indian leader, Dr. Hansa Mehsa ensured that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 reads not only all men, but all human beings are born free and equal. This steadfast commitment to the three principles, especially also to human rights, is even more important in a time where we undertake the selection and appointment process of a new Secretary General, a position that has never been held by a woman in the organization's 80-year history. In this process, which we just started in New York, and you might watched it on UN Web TV, we are looking not only for the next head of the unique multilateral organization of the United Nations. It's not only a simply task of administration decision, but the selection of the next Secretary General is a statement of intent that will shape the direction of the world's unique multilateral organization and demonstrate whether the United Nations truly represents the more than 8 billion people we serve around the world in all its diversity, and of half of which are women and girls. While the UN is indispensable, it has to reform itself to be more efficient, more agile, and avoid duplication to better deliver on the ground and meet the challenges of the 21st century and beyond. In this regard, I was pleased to meet with the UN resident coordinators and UN country teams of India and Bhutan to discuss how we can use the UN 80 reform to strengthen the work they are doing to support countries in achieving their development goals. Because whether we truly serve all the people will be determined not only in New York or Geneva, but primarily whether we are improving the lives of people in communities around the world, especially also here in India, where a sixth of the world population lives. And I really commend also the work of the more than 20 UN agencies here in India to deliver every day on the implementation of the SDGs. This underlines that the UN is needed every day, even though we are facing intense challenges. No single day would the world be better off without the United Nations. But as much as the world needs the UN these days also needs the world. It needs governments, it needs civil societies, it needs young people and citizens from all walks of life to defend this unique multilateral organization, to defend the house of humanity, peace, and dialogue. And in this regard, I also commend the strong commitment of the Indian people to the UN, as demonstrated by the enthusiastic participation in the nationwide competition to design a commemorative stamp to celebrate the United Nations 80th anniversary. As I learned when I was presented with this beautiful stamp depicting UN peacekeepers and the peace staff, nearly 750,000 students from around the country submitted proposals that showcased not only their artistic talent and their commitment to the UN, peace, development, and multilateral cooperation, but also the spirit of India's great founder Gandhi, be the change you wish to see in the world, or as we framed it for the 80th session of the United Nations, better together. This is what we all strive for. In this regard, I thank India, I thank the government of India for their hospitality of the visit of the President of the General Assembly visit, and I'm also thanking you for joining this press statement today. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks so much. So we'll take groups of questions, and if you could please say your name and the organization that you're with, and then we will take a group. So I saw your hand, and the gentleman here, your hand, and then your hand, and then we'll get to a few. Let's take those three first, and then we'll get to a few on this side. Yes, ma'am, and then you, sir, and then you.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Yeshi Seli from Business India. You just spoke about UN peacekeepers, with the ongoing conflict between Israel, US, and Iran. There are a lot of peacekeepers in Lebanon. 6 of them have died. 3 were from Indonesia, and I think the same amount from Italy. How is it that you're going to ensure the safety of the peacekeepers? We have nearly 600 there.
Okay, thank you for that question. And now the gentleman behind you. Yes.
Ma'am, I'm Siddhant Sibal from WION. Ma'am, my first question is on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, India's position, because India has been forefront. India is seen as a natural contender, but the process has been very slow, painfully slow. What's your view on that? And my second question is on the next Secretary General. What has been the conversation with the Indian External Affairs Minister? What's India's view? Is India backing one of the candidates?
Ma'am, I'm Pranay Upadhyay from India Today. Adding to what my colleague Siddhant has asked, its United Nations is going to complete 80 years of its foundation, and it's a very important year. But unfortunately, the UN is turning out to be very ineffective in solving global problems. You mentioned the requirement of it. What you and United Nations is doing to speeden up the process of reform, including the Security Council reform? And besides that, how do you see the alternative arrangements coming up and the mediation process of conflict resolution being taken up by the countries and the organizations like Board of Peace? What are your views on that?
All right, we will take those first 3 questions for the PGA.
Thank you very much. Your questions also underline your country's strong commitment to the United Nations, which we heavily need in these times, maybe starting with the last question, because as you mentioned, there have been some voices lately questioning the role and the importance of the United Nations, also with inviting to other forms of organization. However, as we saw also over the last months, bringing peace to regions is not as easy as just speaking about it. So you need the experience of ceasefire negotiation, and the UN is a unique place where every country around the world has a seat at the table, no matter how big or small, no matter how powerful or rich they are. for a good reason, because to find a just and fair and lasting peace, it needs a clear commitment to the equality and sovereignty of every country. And yes, it has been challenging for the United Nations these days, but we should not forget it has always been challenging. There was no single decade in UN history without wars. Unfortunately, the whole reason for building this House of Peace was after 2 world wars to, as one Secretary General said back in time, not bring humanity to heaven, but to prevent it from hell. And in this regard, I commend every peacekeeping and peace building negotiations going on. And unfortunately, we do not speak enough about those conflicts and crises being prevented, because we learned in COVID there's no glory in prevention. But we have seen in the last recent years, for example, with the Central Asian states having conflicts about water, about borders for a long time, but it was also thanks to the Peace-Building Commission work of the United Nations that they settled this dispute now peacefully together. When we saw it, internal conflicts with regard to Colombia, for example, it was the UN, but obviously we have to do better, and this is why the UNAID reform is of such a high importance. We just finalized a resolution, it's called on Workstream 2, where we focus our work more, so mandates, so decisions by the UN General Assembly, which we have more than 40,000 over the 80 years, they have to be reduced to focus on the important points in these times. We call for sunset clauses, we call for avoiding duplications. Same goes here to the work on the ground of the different agencies under UNAID. We are discussing mergers of agencies to more focus on their work to avoid duplications in the field. To the questions with regard to the first one and peacekeeping in relation to the war in the Middle East. Every effort to come to a ceasefire is highly needed, not only because the blockage and the attacks on the Strait of Hormuz are affecting every part around the world. Oil prices are going up, fertilizer prices are going up. One country has even declared a state of energy emergency, but also because, as you mentioned, it overshadows the devastating situation for the people in Gaza. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is still heartbreaking. We are seeing in Lebanon 1.3 million people being displaced. We have seen the attacks on peacekeepers in Lebanon. The Secretary General and myself, we strongly condemned any attacks on UN peacekeepers. It's a commitment by all member states of the United Nations to ensure the safety of peacekeepers, especially as people from all around the world commit their work, their life for the peace of other countries, and therefore the security is of highest importance. And the work from the UN on finding not only a ceasefire but a peaceful settlement of this conflict is our utmost responsibility. With regard to the second question, and the Security Council reforms, this has been a debate going on for more than 17 years. As we all know, it is in the Charter that 5 member states do have a special responsibility and also a right to veto. However, it comes with the responsibility to stand up for peace and security. And given the situation that also P5 members are in attack of the Charter of the United Nations in these times, the discussions about the reform of the Security Council has also increased. I appointed 2 co-facilitators to lead this process. Different proposals are on the table. Also proposal from this country, but many other proposals as well, especially also from the African Union, which is not represented in the Security Council as a whole continent as a permanent member of the Security Council. So the reform debate of the Security Council is also part of the credibility of the United Nations. Yet, we have taken already small steps. We had, for example, the veto initiative debate after there was a veto against the resolution on the Strait of Hormuz in the Security Council. So this reform step, that if the Security Council is being blocked, it comes to the General Assembly to debate it, is one also to strengthen the United Nations and its credibility. With regard to the selection process of the Secretary General, as a President of the General Assembly, I'm chairing and convening this process on a transparent and neutral matter, and therefore it's in the hand of each member states to make their decision on the different candidates. We had 4 candidates in the hearing last week, and the process will go on that the Security Council, which has a special role in it, will also hear the candidates. There will be an open town hall meeting with other candidates as well. And I encourage everybody also here in India to engage with this process, because the next Secretary General will not only serve the delegations and ambassadors within the United Nations halls, but is supposed to serve all people from around the world.
Okay, thank you. Since we took some questions from this side, I'm going to go to this side next. And I see the gentleman in the back with the watch on. You had your hand raised. And then the gentleman here in the white shirt. And then...
Hello. Saurabh Sharma, I'm from the Outlook Business. So my question is, there is growing criticism that the UN is becoming less effective in conflict resolution. So whether it's the ongoing war in the West Asia or the conflicts going in the Africa, or the conflict going between the Russia and Ukraine. So as the head of the United Nations General Assembly, what steps will you take to restore its credibility?
Yes. Ma'am, thank you for the opportunity. First of all, you've heard of the Board of Peace. What do you make of it? How effective will it be in your view? The other thing is regarding the next President of the General Assembly. We know that the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh had a long chat with the Secretary General, I think on the 26th of March. And has he had a chat with you? And what do you make of this, please? Thank you.
The PGA, would you like to take those two?
Maybe on the last question for the Secretary General or the President of the General Assembly, because my term ends in September, and there are current candidates from Bangladesh and also Cyprus, as I've met both of them. But again, it lies in the hands of the member states to take the decision on the upcoming President of the General Assembly. With regard to the Board of Peace, I touched it already before to the question. Member states are open and free to organize them in different groups. So we had the meeting, I had the pleasure to join it in my previous role here with G20. There's an upcoming BRICS meeting in your country. In other regions, they have many, many other regional organizations or also international organizations. But there's a reason why for international peace and security, there is one organization called United Nations to be responsible for peace and security, because every country, no matter how big or small, how powerful or rich, has a seat at the table, because you will not find just peace for anybody in the world if you have to pay a fee to join it, or if you negotiate how much power you have. The equality between countries, and thereby the equality between all people around the world, is based on the Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the UN is a unique place where all these delegations are coming together. Also, I would like to add, with regulations, for example, of diplomatic immunity, also with regulation on visa regulations for host countries. Unfortunately, these days, not everybody is complying to it. But if you want to find in a situation of crisis and conflicts also places for negotiation, It needs a neutral and objective place, and this is, as I said, for a good reason, the United Nations. And I think everybody could also see in the last weeks and months that something, maybe also in the social media time, which is said so easily. Yeah, we just strive for something and we just tell there should be peace and then there's peace, that it's obviously not so easy. It takes sometimes years. This is also the experience of the United Nations, that you have to have a very, very long call for peace, and you have to endure also the dark hours when you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And again, this is exactly the role of the United Nations, to never give up, but always strive not only for peace, but also justice and accountability after a ceasefire happened or peace negotiations happened. And this comes also to the first question from Outlook Business. Yes, you're totally right that in the given time, we have challenges with regard to finding peace and also ceasefires in conflict and crisis situation. But at the same moment, as I said before, without UN peacekeepers at different parts of the world, nothing would be better. So everybody who is calling for maybe we don't need the UN anymore, just imagine from one day to the other, we would not have peacekeepers in different parts of the world. Just imagine the World Food Program would leave your country, but especially would leave in these times Sudan or other crisis areas around the world. Just imagine the World Health Organization would not vaccinate children around the world anymore. Then half of the world's population under 18 would not have any vaccination shot. And even for the most developed industrialized country, I think nobody would dare to even enter in an airplane, because also the safety of aviation is regulated by a sub-body of the United Nations. So this is why, besides all the shortcomings we are obviously facing also with regard to the work of the UN, no single day would we be better off. On the other hand, as the UN is so strongly under pressure, we have to do better. And this is why we have to reform on the different agencies. This means looking where do we find duplication, and we do find duplication. For example, in a situation where many people are being displaced because of conflicts or crises or natural disasters, many organizations are doing identification, but it doesn't need 3 or 5 organizations doing the same thing. So we have to look how we can simplify these processes. We are also looking at, the Secretary General especially, how to reduce the oversight cost with regard to administration, but also technical assistance, especially also in Geneva and in New York. In a digitalized time, we don't have to have hard copies of all the printed materials anymore. So we can be way more efficient in using modern technologies with regard to costs of conferences. However, again, if we want to serve all people, we have, for example, 6 official UN languages. And this really depends also on human skills and not only on artificial intelligence to do translation. So we should not allow those who want to weaken the UN to weaponize the overdue reform process, but I call on member states especially and governments who believe in the United Nations to come up with supportive reform proposals to make this institution stronger and fit for the future and up to the challenges of the 21st century.
Excuse me. This lady in the pink had a question, had her hand up, and this gentleman and this lady here. So if we could take that round. I'm sorry. Okay. Yes. No, I'm so sorry. She had her hand up, so let's give the mic to her.
Ma'am, Mike, I have 2 questions, both on the subject of the presidency, the next president of the UNGA.
Could you introduce yourself and your
Yes, I'm Shikha Salaria from the Sunday Guardian and NewsX. My first question is about the withdrawal of the candidacy of Palestine. The Palestinian ambassador to India has made comments that in the past there has been pressure on the Palestine to withdraw from such high-profile candidacies. So what do you have to say to that? Number 2, ma'am, ma'am, there have been 86 academicians, legal professionals, and politicians who have written to member states against the candidacy of the Foreign Minister of Bangladesh, Mr. Khalilur Rahman, and they say that he represents a civilian government which has systematically targeted a section of the population. What are your thoughts about that? Thank you.
Let's go ahead and take another round. The gentleman on the far left here, and then we'll bring it.
Kalol from The Hindu. What is your opinion about targeting of presidents by the United States? Presidents and head of government. I'm referring to Nicolas Maduro especially.
Good afternoon, Excellency. I'm Divya from Indian Express. You just had a meeting with External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and discussed West Asia crisis. So what were the specific discussions in that regard, and also about the role that India can play in global diplomacy? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that round.
Thank you very much. With regard to the first question, if you're calling to everyone to stick to the rules, we agreed. For me, it's very important that this applies in neutral observation to everyone and to all of the rules. And there are not only rules like the Charter of the United Nations, but there are also rules of procedure and internal rules for applications. And the rules, you mentioned the Secretary General process, but also the President of the General Assembly process. They are clear rules, so everyone can apply. And most of the times you have to be presented by individual member states, and then it's up to the member states, the General Assembly, to decide on that one. And it's not up to the former President of the General Assembly to comment on it, neither on the upcoming PGA candidates nor on the Secretary General candidates. In both positions, you have to swear an oath on the Charter of the United Nations, because this is what you have to represent. And in my situation, I had to defend the Charter quite often in my short term already. And based on this Charter, member states can question the different candidates in interactive dialogues. Also with the next PGA, I had it myself. It was a 3-hour-long interview by member states, and I can assure you that there have been also some very critical questions. So then at the end of these hearings on the different pillars, peace and security, sustainable development, but also human rights, every member state can make up their own mind, and my responsibility is to provide the space for every member state to ask their question open and freely. With regard to the withdrawal of candidates, it's the same. There have been withdrawals with regard to the position of the PGA or nominations which were expected, but then they weren't turned in. Same for the SG candidates. There has been also withdrawals from candidates who have been proposed before. But again, it's the decision by the candidates or by the countries who filed these applications or nominations beforehand. With regard to the question from the colleague from the Hindu press, I've been very clear with any violations of the Charter, also with regard to the situation in Venezuela, that human rights are indivisible, and every person around the world enjoys the human rights. And if there are human rights violations, we have UN bodies who are responsible to deal with this, like with the Security Council, sometimes, unfortunately, also to the blockage of some member states. We cannot proceed as we should within the UN systems. Yet, this does not mean that the UN is inactive, or it doesn't mean that you're allowed to violate other regulations of the UN Charter, be it on peace and security. And this is why the Secretary General and myself, we have made very clear that Venezuela has to, I answer your question, has to obey to the human rights standards for the people of Venezuela. But it's also very clear that the use of force is prohibited by the Charter of the United Nations. And if member states are in a situation where they say we have to protect human rights or we have to prevent even genocide, there's a clear way to move forward, bring it to the Security Council, bring it to the United Nations, but unilateral action in violations of the Charter is not allowed under our UN Charter rules, because the Charter is not optional. It is an obligation for every member state to protect the peace and security around the world, and also to protect the sovereignty of every member state. But for me, it's very important to say this does not mean inaction, but it means the efforts of joining forces together to protect all the three principles within the Charter. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, with regard to my meeting with the foreign minister, as I mentioned, we discussed obviously the current situation around the world, be it the conflict in the Middle East, or be it the situation in the broader perspective, especially with the outcomings and consequences on trade, on the law of sea. This is a strong question also for UNCLOS, as we have seen it also in the Black Sea before, if we have seen it in the Strait of Hormuz. But if we accept also for the law of sea that this is being violated unilaterally, then trade around the world will almost be impossible. But we have discussed also intensively on UNAID reform. As I said, India being the biggest country in the world, the results of the UNAID reform by implementing on the SDG will have a strong effect on this country, and India is, with its active support of the SDGs also in other countries, a key driver also for the progress for others. And this discussion around the Secretary General process obviously has been also part of our discussion. As always, time is way too short, I guess also for this press conference.
We're drawing close. We have two more questions, and it was this gentleman here and this gentleman here, and that's all we'll have time for today. So the last two questions, please.
Good evening, Madam President. My name is Deepak Arora. I'm diplomatic editor with the Tribune Online. Welcome here. My question is that you mentioned about the next Secretary General, and you also mentioned that, and there's been talk about next Secretary General to be a woman, So personally, would you rule out the other two candidates? I know it is a different process. I know the process. What's your personal opinion on that? Would you personally would like to see a woman candidate as the Secretary General? Thank you.
And could we have the mic here for this gentleman in the front? And that's our last question. Thank you.
Ma'am, I'm Akhilesh Suman from DD News. You met External Affairs Minister and also Minister of Electronics and Information Technology, I think. So what transpired in the meeting between you and both the ministers, and what do you expect from India?
Maybe starting with the second question, not only with regard to the size of your country, but also with regard to the modern technologies. India just recently hosted the AI Summit, underlining that it's also a driver in this process in a time where not only CO2 or a virus of a pandemic does not stop at the border, it's the same with social media, and it's the same with information sharing. So again, it's in the interest of all of us to have a governance structure for artificial intelligence in these times, that the knowledge and especially the programming of the algorithm is not only dominated in a single or two or few countries, but it's a shared knowledge of the citizens around the world. Not only with regard to knowledge, not only with regard to information sharing, but also with regard to protection. I guess all of you are having children, teenager children or grandchildren or friends of them, seeing online how this wonderful technology can be misused, also being and especially targeted against women and girls. If we look at deep fakes, for example, 96% of sexual related content is targeting women. So these systems are set up to disgrace or attack women and girls. So the backlash of women's rights has to be fought especially against in the digital sphere. We also see apps which teach, again, teenagers how to commit suicide. So again, it's in the interest of all of us to find a regulation that serves the people and does not harm the people. And therefore, I also commend India's role here in this regard. And I'm visiting also with the ministers and actors in the digital space to hear what their efforts are going on. The next meeting will be in Geneva. So it's again a process which, in my point of view, can almost be done at a platform like the United Nations, because it provides that also very small countries will be included in the process. With regard to the selection of the Secretary General, as I'm the president of 193 very diverse countries, and I must say luckily so, because how boring would life be if we wouldn't be diverse, but if we would look and act and behave all the same. Yet these 193 member states all have to play to the same rules, because otherwise it would not a fair competition. And this also counts to the selection process of the next Secretary General. The member states set out some clear guidelines. One of them was that they called in unanimity, and in these times, to strongly nominate women. And therefore, as the president of the General Assembly, I'm reminding member states these days, if 193 member states strongly call on the nomination of women, that after 80 years, as we didn't have a female Secretary General yet, it would be really hard to explain at the end of the process why, again, there was no woman to be found in the world. And I heard it quite often before, I guess every woman here in the room as well. It was really hard to find a capable woman, but frankly speaking, we have 4 billion potential candidates around the world, women and girls, maybe not the girls if they are under 18. But this question is also a question about the credibility of the United Nations standing up for human rights, men and women human rights. And it will be very interesting, I can assure you, so it won't get boring over the summer. And if you want to be engaged in this process, not only that you can follow if there are more interactive dialogues upcoming, but also you can invite, or your government or institutions can invite the different candidates to present themselves also in this part of the world, because this will be also your next Secretary General. I thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all.